Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. SNP-led Glasgow Council has been very successful in raising a lot of money through its poor tax. That is to say, the tax it's put out so that poor people can pay tax. It's a lovely little system. If you're rich, you don't pay it, and if you're poor, you do. Very progressive tax that helps the wealthier in society maintain their wealth and won't allow those poorer ones, of course, any chance of catching up. Don't want poor people becoming rich. That seems to be the SNP's mantra anyway. And so in the first 2 months of the low emission zone in Glasgow, £600,000 of poor tax money has been raised. Now, why am I calling it the poor tax? Well, of course, because rich people, of course, can buy the new cars. Nothing to do with the emissions. So you can go out and buy yourself a nice 6.3 litre Mercedes. It can be filthy as you like. It doesn't matter. It's new. And therefore it's allowed into the city. Meanwhile, some poor sod on a little 1.1 Corsa, which puts out hardly anything at all, but just happens to be 2 days over some arbitrary date, he'll have to pay it. And of course the difference as well is that the rich, for them, even if they did have to pay it, what's £12.50 to a man who earns £1 million a year? It's sod all. But £12.50 when you're on, say, £20,000 a year, well, that's a significant portion of your post-tax earnings. And so, yes, we will call it a poor tax because that's exactly what it is. Not only is it only the poor that pay it because they tend to be the ones who can't afford the newer cars, but the effects upon them of that charge hits them much worse than it does the rich. While the punishment is based in money, it is not fair. It is based purely on the ability to pay, and them as earns a lot, barely a punishment for them, is it? So we'll have a look at this, see how much they've raised, and see why this is such an iniquitous scheme and an iniquitous tax, and completely against sort of any kind of tax progressive basis for punishing people for daring to be poor. Here goes. So Glasgow's draconian low emission zone rakes in £600,000 for cash-strapped SNP-run council in 2 months as fines double. Because obviously they need a lot of money and they're not able to tax rich people, but they can tax the poor because the poor are in less of a position to fight back. So they just tax the poor so that they can spend it on things that will benefit the wealthier members of society. So the Scottish Conservatives say Scots drivers are being hammered at a time of a cost of living crisis as Glasgow Council chiefs coin it in after the zone was enforced. And they call it low emission zone. What they actually should call it is a PPZ, a poor people's zone, because it's got nothing, of course, to do with emissions. It's not emissions based, it's age of car based. So the number of motorists snared by Glasgow's new low emission zone scheme more than doubled in its second month of operation, because of course it's all money raising. Don't be fooled by anything else. It's money the whole way. They don't care. Almost 6,000 penalty charge notices were handed out last month, twice the 2,922 issued in June, the first month of the scheme. This takes the total raised by the SNP run council in fines since June to almost £600,000 of poor people's money. One unlucky driver picked up PCNs totaling £480 because of repeat offences during the month. A potential of £413,400 gathered by 5,933 fines in July alone takes the total raised by the City Council in just 2 months to 588,720, and they're not even ashamed that they're only taking this from the poorer members of society. Graham Simpson, the Scottish Conservatives' shadow transport minister, said the draconian implementation of Glasgow's low emission zone is already hammering hard-pressed motorists during a cost of living crisis. These eye-watering figures show why the SNP Green Council should have listened to the concerns raised by people, by businesses and by organisations across the city. Instead, they have ploughed on regardless, and now their anti-car agenda is hitting people in the pocket at the worst possible time. They need to be. They should be ashamed of themselves. While we all want to improve air quality in our cities, we don't, because Glasgow's already got one of the cleanest city airs in the country. The low emission zone is yet another example of an SNP green policy being rolled out in the worst possible way. It's because they don't think about anything. They're morons. And of course, it's got nothing. Let's make it fair. Let's do it on emissions. If you're going to have a low emission zone, let's actually make the metric emissions, and then tax according to emissions. So when you come in, if you've got a car that only just fails, but it's only because it's only slightly over, you pay £5 a day. If your car is a big 6.3 Merc chunkering it out, it's £1,000 a day. That seems fair, doesn't it? That seems more progressive in its taxation. The rich pay more, the poor pay less. It also means that it's easier to avoid if you're poor, because you can buy an older car, that just happens to be slightly greener. You don't have to go to the expense of buying a newer car. Anyway, the LEZ, the first of its kind in Scotland, and hopefully last, because come the next election, if we can get them out, a lot of these will be reversed. The Tories have said day one that they're reversing all low emission zones day one, should they get in. Anyway, the LEZ, the first of its kind in Scotland, was introduced to reduce pollution. No, it wasn't. It was introduced to raise money. If it was introduced to raise pollution, of course, emissions, particularly from buses, HGV and older cars. From June, drivers of banned vehicles were fined for entering the Glasgow city centre at a rate of almost 100 a day, total of 2,922. And so, only cars though. What about the buses? They've got all these buses, and half the council's own vehicles can't go in. They've got the buses, and the bus drivers are going, well, we can't go in. And the bus drivers or the bus owners have said they're not prepared to pay the fine. So the buses aren't going in. There's no bus service, or they're very reduced. There's still some buses that are new. But the bus services in the centre of Glasgow have been cut back a lot because they don't have as many old, they've got too many old vehicles, put it that way. However, owners of diesels over 8 years old and petrol vehicles dated from 2006 were told that this was in effect a soft launch with a grace period of people to get used to the scheme. Only one £60 penalty charge notice was due to be issued per vehicle during the month. However, officials promised that from July, surcharging would come into force, whereby the penalty amount doubles with every subsequent breach. The penalty rates are capped at £480 for cars and light good vehicles and £960 for buses and HGVs. There were 777 fines under this category. People had gone in more than once, and of course you may have people who've gone in not realising that they've gone in, because they've actually shown this, that they don't have the ring, if you like, is not complete. There are roads where you can drive in, but where there's no sign. But they're still getting picked up on the cameras. It's wrong. A spokesman for the council said, we were happy to take all this money from poor people because fuck them. No, that's not what they said. It's what they meant, but it's not what they said. What they said is, to allow for a period of familiarisation, non-compliant vehicles detecting Glasgow's LEZ received a maximum charge of one penalty charge notice during the zone's first month of operation, and surcharging, which allows the penalty amount to double for subsequent breaches, started in July. Because we need the money. 90% of the vehicles currently entering the city will be uninfected, but the poor people who can't afford to change will be affected. It is an absolute tax on poor, no matter how badly they spin it, and we know it because it's money based. It's money based, and therefore it's an attack on poor people. And they haven't done it on emissions; they've done it on age of car. Again, it's an attack directly on poor people, and I'm thinking there's got to be a legal charge against this under the Equality Act, 2010 Equality Act, because maybe, I don't know if it is a protected, but it's not financial income, it's not wealth, it's not poverty. Shouldn't people be protected in law if they're poor? You can't find someone who hasn't got the money. What are you going to do? Take their council house away from them because they can't afford to buy a car? What are you being punished for? Being poor. That is that is the SNP now. They are punishing poverty. They make you poor and then they punish your poverty. It is double, isn't it? It is double bastards. That's what they are. Anyway, I shall round up and come up and leave them to soak in their own juices. Now, Khan in London has a similar scheme, and it's equally hated, it must be said. But with his scheme, it does at least look at the car registration. It compares that car on a database of cars, and it looks at what the emissions from that car are based on what the Department of Transport provides the details on. And if the car meets the criteria, you're fine. It's based on emissions. It doesn't care how old your car is. Does it meet the minimum conditions? If yes, fine, drive through, not an issue. If not, you're paying up, mate. Seems simple, seems fair, but not in Glasgow. And the reason not in Glasgow is because they couldn't be bothered to integrate the database. They couldn't be bothered to go and say, oh, we'll have this database in that shows, the full database that shows the emissions. And they did it purely on age because it was easier. In fact, they were so cheap-skated, they can't, just buy yourself an Irish car. Go across on a boat, buy an Irish car, come back, drive it around all you like. Because it's not registered in the British registrations. Northern Irish isn't either. So Northern Ireland, Southern Ireland, you'll be fine. England, Scotland and Wales, they all have the same registrations, and they're run out of what's the place in Wales? Swansea. Whereas Northern Ireland is done in Belfast, but they don't have access. Go across Ireland or the south, buy yourself a paddy car, either side, north or south, doesn't matter. Drive it around Glasgow all you like. There's nothing they can do about it. Hey, follow me here, kids, for more helpful hints. Anyway, thank you very much for listening, and I hope you have. Go and buy an Irish car. Until next time, stay safe, stay well, and as my reward for giving you sound, sage, financial advice, please hit my subscribe button. Thank you very much. Bye.